but I want to do an Eamon with you because it serves as a absolutely wonderful foundation for everything else to come. And the reason why is because it starts with the laws. It really does. It starts with the laws. Now, I was looking through the archives. Right? Although I don't know if you can see that on the shelf up there. That's all the ones that I have. Right? It's not a anyway on the top shelf there. I was looking for through the archives and I came across a archive that said, "Why develop?" Reasonable question. The archives. It sounds like the Jedi archives, doesn't it? I was in a Jedi temple, scouring the archives. Anyway, why develop? And I thought, well, okay, that's a good question, but the question really hasn't been asked, at least not in a formal way, of why study the laws. So I want you to ponder on that for a minute and kind of give me back the first thing that comes to mind for you, because I've harped and battered on the laws quite a bit. If you go back through the videos, I think they come up pretty much every single time. There's so many we haven't even talked about yet, usually just 3 and 7, sometimes 2, 4. Why? Why study the laws? There's a sentiment I'm going to try and get to with you. Come on, brave people.
For, for one, we are subject to them. It's
Yeah.
the drive
Okay.
for me is
Start there
okay.
and then go up a level. That is effect. Do you understand the difference between cause and effect?
Yes.
We go from effect, which is where you started. Let's now go
Right.
to cause and then cause of the cause. All right. So effect, you're absolutely right. We are subject to them. Next.
I've never been able to get to that.
All right. I'll help with this. And then the third one should become obvious. The cause of the cause should become obvious, which is really that without the laws, we wouldn't be here. Yeah? We wouldn't be here at all because there could be no order. Yeah? I mean, even in Genesis, the first chapter, it talks about that the Holy Spirit or the active force, or however you want to interpret it, was roving to and fro over the waters, and everything was null and void, essentially, which was Egyptian, actually, is where that philosophy came from. But it's chaos in the beginning. There is no law, and so you wouldn't exist. I think that's the secondary, most fundamental aspect to it. And of course, the first one would be neither would God, or the absolute, or however you want to address it. Because there has to be a substance, there has to be something to be able to replicate itself to begin with. You can't know yourself. Mark, what was that thing I said the other day? Let's see if we can get back to it. It was regarding, right, in order for God to know itself, it had to forget everything it knew about itself.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
About that. All right. So that's why I study the laws, because it's really an aspect of respect for the fact that without them, I wouldn't be here. Neither would God. Now, let's do something together, because I said I want to take you through an Eamon. I want to do an Eamon with you. The problem with doing an Eamon is that it can go too fast. You can say things like, you can talk about the 7 levels of the astral light, and you can talk about the tarot, and you can talk about reincarnation and the possibility of immortality, and gnomes, sylphs, salamanders, and you see what I mean? Like you can just go bam, 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 bam. And the way that it was presented in the early 1970s and 80s was like a buffet. You understand a buffet? Instead of going to a restaurant and sitting down and they hand you a menu and you say, I would like the cordon bleu or whatever the case is. Um, uh, I know, I'm sorry, Hannah, the eggplant burger. Yes, that's an eggplant. Those are great. Anyway,
Oh,
a buffet is you just get a plate. Actually, they don't even give you a plate at the table. They're just like, they still expect a tip, but they're like, go get it yourself. Anyway, you walk up to this massive buffet, get your plate, kind of like the military actually, but get your plate, and then you pick what you want. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this. Take it back and you eat it. That's how the Emin was presented in the first place, because nothing like it had ever shown up on the planet, really. I mean, Taoism was probably the closest thing to ever do that. But you see, it was like a crunch. Get it all out there. Well, okay, we've got it all out there. That's fine. Now it's time to actually do what the proposition was to begin with, which was either prove it or disprove it. Take it in for your own life or don't. Those sorts of things, right? Okay. Now, you've heard things. We're going to go through some things kind of systematically that you've heard before. You've heard things like the physical body is the coat for the electrical forms of the soul and spirit. Huh? Right?
Yeah.
And it sounds really good, doesn't it? Yeah, sure. Got that. Next bit, please. Well, I'll ask you. I've done this before, but I'll ask you to do it again. Raise your right hand for me, please. Good, thank you. Raise your left hand. Yeah, look left or right or whatever the case is. See, you can do all of these sorts of things, but now I say raise your soul. Make your spirit flare. Can you do it? Problem is that you don't know what the soul and spirit are. They're kind of abstract. And so how can you take a premise that the physical form is the coat of the electrical presence of a soul and spirit without knowing what those things are? It's a proposition at best, and at worst, uh, you teach it to others as so. See, this is what happens, doesn't it? Like, oh, that sounds really good. Echo, yeah. Let's not be echoes. Let's not be the gray ghost that Leo talks about in one of his poems. No gray ghost. That's an echo. So I'm going to give you a starting point for knowledge of what your soul and your spirit are. Does that sound reasonable?
Yes.
This is how we're going to work. We're going to work this way, okay, for the next however long it takes. Look around you. Just look around you. Pick an object in the room, right? Anywhere. It doesn't matter. Now, you sense that thing. For me, right here is a very beautiful lamp. Okay? I sense it. See it. Now, touch your nose. And you feel that, don't you?
Right.
Take a sniff of the air. Take a sip of something or whatever the case might be. Get a sense of the taste of things. So we've got, and listen, you hear my voice. Now, they say that the eyes are the window to the soul, but the reality of it is that all five senses are the window to the soul. The soul is in receipt of things. And anytime you have a sense impression, it's one of the five aspects of your soul that takes it in. Now, the part of you that recognizes the fact that you're hearing my voice right now, for example, or that you touched your nose, or that you looked at whatever it is, that is your soul registration of something. Okay, that is your soul that registers it. It has to do with the 5 centers, but it also has to do just with pentagrammic nature. Aside from sun and moon, which represent the higher thinking and higher emotional center, the other 5 classical planets have to do with the aspects of the soul. And so what happens as you go through this quickening in your mother's womb is that all 5 planets go, wow, there's a new life appearing here. I'm going to send a bit of a signal down to it. Yeah? So you get your Jupiterian influence, you get your Saturn influence, you get your Martian influence, your Venusian influence, and your Mercurian influence. They all come in different doses, but this is what makes your soul unique, and yet it's still planetary. It doesn't mean that it's Earth planetary, it's an astral thing. The wanderers, okay? But if you want to get in touch with what your soul is, start to become aware of what it is that senses your environment. That's it. And in the past, we've called this self-observation, or what's the other term? No, remembering yourself, roughly. Vivify your experience of life. That will charge up and help you become aware of what your soul is. And so when someone says, raise your soul, what they're saying to you is vivify. Vivify this aspect. Like right now, presumably you're looking at me. Remember yourself, observe that part of you that's actually seeing me, and become aware of the fact that you exist at that same time. Okay? That's how you raise your soul, just like raising your right or left arm. I'm not doing it because I've got that camera that will begin to follow me or zoom around to zoom in on me if I move in awkward ways. You get the idea though, yeah. Okay, so do you have any questions on how to sense your soul? It's not actually that difficult. It's just no one ever taught you, apparently. Eh, all good? Makes sense? Did you think you could knock that out in like 3 or 4 minutes? It's pretty good. Might be a record. Okay, now how about the spirit? Make your spirit flare. That's the question, wasn't it? Anyone want to have a go? You've got one. It's promoting you and urging you to do so.
It's not something that's been taught before.
Well, darn it, it should have been.
Mm-hmm.
It's been talked about, hasn't it?
Yeah.
You know, I find that actually kind of irresponsible,
Yep.
personally. So in Taoism and Buddhism and a lot of the Asiatic and Eastern religions, they have this particular exercise. And the exercise goes somewhat like this, where you sit in a meditation and you think, am I my body? And you let that response echo, and you'll say no, because you even use the word my body, right? It's clear, isn't it, that you're not? Yeah. Am I my mind? Am I my thoughts? Am I my emotions? And it's not like rote. You really want to go through and listen for something to echo. And what you get to is this point where you almost feel a bit stumped. Like, okay, I'm not any of these things. What am I? And the answer is your spirit. It's an individuality within you that very seldom gets to come out. It is that I that we've been talking about, not in small letters, but capital I. Yeah? It is what is essentially you. That isn't your thoughts, that isn't your body, that isn't your emotions, that isn't your whatever. It's none of those things. It's almost indefinable. I mean, we can put the word spirit on it, but it's almost undefinable. Because in our own experience of ourselves as an example of the ray of creation, it is the inner God. It is the one. It is the unity of yourself that cannot be described. Does that make sense? So it's a bit harder to get in touch with the spirit aspect because it's kind of indescribable. But you've got one. That's what it is. And where does it come from? Do you know? The soul
Sun, I
comes
believe.
from the planets. Yeah, sure, the sun, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the local god of our neighborhood.
Mhm.
1.3 billion Earths can fit in it, or some ridiculous number like that. I'd say that's pretty massive. And interestingly enough, really everything does come from the sun. When you go to work in the day, what you're really spending is sunshine.
Spending sunshine.
You're spending sunshine. Everything you do, you spend sunshine. Now think about it for a moment. We'll start off with a mundane example, which is, well, let's make it easy, solar power, right? Some countries, some neighborhoods, whatever the case might be, have solar power. And so that's pretty much direct, isn't it? Where they pump electricity in and convert it directly, usually with like gallium arsenide or something like that, but they convert it directly. Oh, it's doing it again. I can see the blue flashing. It's going to do it. But it converts it directly into electricity, which then pumps through your house, converts it into light, and so on and so forth. That's easy to see, isn't it? Because it's pretty much direct. But other places burn fossil fuel. Now, fossil fuel, whether it be millions of years old or however old it is, but fossil fuel is, generally speaking, the remains of photosynthesis, right, which is the plant life or the fauna life of the planet, collecting sunshine, turning it into sugars, yeah, and then it goes into a decay situation under pressure, and it becomes oil or coal, these types of things. And that becomes fossil fuel that then we burn to turn, to boil water and turn turbines, and it becomes electricity and light and all of this type of stuff. Now, when you get into the idea of the human complex, we eat vegetables, fruits, and in many cases animals. But they all got their initial energy from the sun. And when you consume it in the form of carbohydrates and proteins and all this other type of stuff, what you're consuming, ultimately going back to the cause of the cause, well, no, the cause is sunshine. And so when you plod off to work and hammer nails or type on computers or whatever the case, whatever you might do, you're spending sunshine because you have to go replenish that. Have you ever had this kind of idea? I want to get you to the point where you begin to look at the cause of things. It'll put you in a more profound state. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Have a good day. It would be enough, though, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Soul and spirit and sun and all this type of stuff. But yeah, you can get in touch with your own local sun by asking yourself that question from your soul or from the impressions that your soul receives and from how you process it internally. That aspect of what is it that's actually perceiving. And you get down to kind of this unity inside yourself that you really can't describe. But once your consciousness, which isn't your spirit, but once your consciousness begins to touch the spirit, it's called a spirit flare because it creates a connection, creates this two-way street, this two-way channel between your external and the internal aspect. Yeah. So there you go, soul and spirit. Granted, it's just an introduction because then you have to learn how to actually do things with them. But now you have a frame of reference that the physical body is the coat or the house of the soul and spirit. Okay? Okay. Recently, as in a few months ago, I think, we talked about, I'm not going to go into the law of 3 or 7 because we've kind of beaten that one to death for the time being. But we did talk about the law of 4. You have recollection of this?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone want to like reheat that, or should I do it? Go on, Pierce.
You are the shepherd, Pierce. We're if every time you ask that question, you're just gonna
I know.
give the same answer, which is
But I
yes.
love asking it anyway. Yep. Because one day. All right. So let's do this. Let's do it like this. Let's see here. I need some white chalk, you know? I've done so many of these lessons that I'm just flat out of white chalk. There's a little tiny bit there, but I'm not going to struggle through it. The law of 4, from a certain standpoint, doesn't exist. What it is when 2 separate aspects of the law of 2 cross paths. Okay, and so you've got, in this example, you've got hot, which I'll just stick with the examples that we've used in the past, and cold. Okay, those are two ends to the bar. And we said hot and cold are just relative values of the amount of molecular movement in something, really. It's hot and cold is. It's not like it exists by itself. Nothing is hot or cold. It's always in relation to something else, isn't it? Yeah. And then we'll stick with the same example. You've got wet and dry. In the universe somewhere, this bar of hot and cold cross paths with the bar of wet and dry. And wet and dry is just the amount of shear force it takes to separate it from itself. Shear force, like you take a bit of coal, since we've already used that example, crack it with a hammer, it's going to shear easily because it lacks wetness. You do the same thing with water, and it'll splash and it'll come right back to itself. It has no shear point. Whatever you pour it into, it's going to assume that position. Whereas if you try and jam a rock that's too big for a glass, into it, it is going to break the glass. And that is actually a pretty good example because glass is actually considered a fluid, but it has a much higher shear point. So it would be more towards the dry end of the fluid than, say, water. You see, these things are relative. But anytime the law of 2 crosses the law of 2, you get what's called the law of 4. Right? And it has certain effects with itself. And so hot and dry, let's use it in classical Cornelius Agrippa terms, okay? Or classical alchemy, if you prefer. Hot and dry, you get fire. Dry and cold, earth. Wet and cold, water. Got the colors wrong here, please forgive me. And wet and hot, you've got air. Okay, these are the classical elements. And really, right in the middle, if they're all balanced, you get the quintessence, all 5 coming together, which we, as human beings, should be more of a quintessence than a hot, cold, wet, dry type of phenomenon, or air, earth, water, fire type of phenomenon. Because we're pentagrammic. That's what quintessence means. It means 5-ish, 5-fold. I'm going somewhere with this, having to do with the soul. Okay, this is why the soul and the spirit, I should say, because I think it's still important to get a better foundation than just looking internally. You'll get some of these ideas that you've been exposed to, but perhaps don't have the foundation for. Right? Is that acceptable? Okay. You've heard things like bull, bird, lion, and serpent, haven't you?
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
bull bird, lion, and oops, that's a terrible R, sorry, R. Or sometimes man, they say. Don't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
Either bull, bird, lion, and serpent, or bull, bird, lion, and man. We'll get to the reason why in that, and then you can go, all right, makes sense. Let's put him here, bull. What would you say? Air, earth, water, fire.
Earth.
You got it. Say bull here. Okay. Bird. That one's pretty obvious.
Air.
Air, yep. Lion.
Fire.
You of all people should know that one, huh? And water, obviously, serpent.
It's
Or human. Do you know what the word human means?
hue, man.
Kind of, yeah. Or humor comes from human. It's an aspect of human. It just means wet, wet being. We're mostly water, like humidity, those sorts of things.
Humorous. Right, right.
Yeah, we're wet beings. So here's part of the clue to this. Why human is sometimes serpent, or sometimes because it's related to the water element. Let's give these charges. All right, so we're going to add charges to things. Hot, obviously, positive. Cold, negative. Wet, negative. And dry, positive. Now, I want you to begin to see something. Hey, someone say something, because right now I just have a black screen.
Okay.
Test,
Yeah.
test.
Yeah, great. Okay, just need to look at somebody. So, because I do these kinds of lessons without anyone here sometimes, just so I can get it. But then, I'm not talking to a screen, right? So, okay. Now, in this quadrant where you've got lion and fire, you have two positive influences, right? So it's plus sign and plus sign, isn't it? Hot and dry for this vector, this third vector of fire. Now, in dry and cold, you've got positive and negative. In cold and wet, you've got negative and negative. That's what produces water and serpent and human. And then in the air vector, you've got negative and positive. In one. You understand where I'm going so far? You've
Yes.
got these various forces, okay? Now, in this quadrant down here below the wet dry line, this would be where the physical body comes from, where the cloak or the soul and the spirit comes from. Right? Because now we're talking about higher and lower aspects to something, not necessarily the aspect of, well, if you want to get technical, let's get technical. The earth would be the physical body. And this aspect over here, the water serpent, would be the etheric body. You know your etheric body? Do you know what that is? Probably all played around with this where you can kind of feel, yeah. Then take your hand, let's do it. All right. Take your hand kind of away from your arm for a minute and then bring it in, and you'll feel this kind of point where there's a little bit of a tingle and pressure, and it almost gets thicker. That's your etheric. If you want to get specific, it's composed of hydrogen 96. If you really want to build it up, you can actually gather it in your hands. Let's get practical, shall we? Take your hands like this, a couple of cups, and preferably either in front of your eyes or in front of your throat, okay? Because that's where a lot of radiation comes from. And begin to bring them together slowly, focusing on the space in between. Like you're packing a ball, okay? You can kind of like pack it in. Leave it there, bring them out again. So it might have started off like a golf ball, and then you get to like a tennis ball where you start to feel that pressure again. Leave it there. Pack and again. You can get to this, you begin to develop this energy here. And really, if you're sitting next to somebody, go ahead and trade it off with them. You know, get this ball of energy, put it in one of your hands, and give it to them, and see if they can feel it. But that's a way to actually gather and collect etheric force from your etheric layer. Did you know this? You know how to, yeah, you feeling it, Ion? Yeah, it almost gets like magnetic and spongy, doesn't it? You know, put it on your cat, see what they do. It's really great. You know, they just usually go either to sleep or go bonkers. It's one or the other, depending on whether your own nature is more gold or silver based. Yeah.
Right.
Give it to your cat and watch them play with it, because they will. They'll bat it around electrically and do all this other wild stuff with it, or they'll just like curl up and go to sleep. In any event, so your physical aspect has to do with your body and your etheric region of your aura. Hydrogen 96 that we've talked about before, and we will get there, why things are called hydrogens and whatnot, but hydrogen 96 is what's composed of your etheric. Okay, anything lower than that, like hydrogen 384, water, you know, hydrogen 192, air. These are things that scientists can measure, but once you get up to hydrogen 96, you get things like thermals. You know, to begin with, the low end of hydrogen 96 is your thermal radiation, heat that comes off your body. And the higher end really has to do with things like the frequency that hormones generate, not the hormones themselves, because those are physical, but the frequency hormones generate, as well as certain aspects of the beginnings of healing force. If you're the kind of person that goes outside and gets eaten alive by mosquitoes, you may not have enough hydrogen 96. You may not have enough density in your etheric region, because that will actually repel them. You see, they don't like to get in there, because it has the effect of almost electrocuting them, if you will. You can get it very strong. Okay. So that's a physical aspect, because you can at least measure the lower end of it, which is heat. All right. So that's the lower bar, having to do with earth and water. And really, that's kind of physically what we're made of anyway, isn't it? I mean, skin and bones and those sorts of things, when they decay and deteriorate, they just turn back into dirt, roughly speaking, carbon compounds and whatnot. And then the water, obviously the bloodstream and all of that type of stuff. All right. Okay, so bird and lion. I suppose that is. Worked it out this morning. Well, I've worked it out before, but I had to work it out fresh this morning, so I'm not giving you dead food.
Griffin. It's
Soul and spirit. Soul and spirit. The bird being soul, and lion spirit. Because there's a value to these. You see, on the left-hand side, it's not quite as charged up. Air is positive, volatile, moving, these types of things. It has that positive aspect to it, but not quite as much as fire does it? Fire is very active. Air is pretty active. Just like earth is very passive and water is pretty passive. Is there better words for that? Very and pretty? Fairly? I don't know. There's got to be better language for this, isn't there? Right. And then from there you can get into astrology, because you've got these fixed cardinal and mutable aspects to things. And cardinal would be the lines themselves. Fixed aspects would be the ones with the most energy, and the mutable would be the ones with the least. And for a long time, I argued and struggled and stretched with myself and others that the law of three was fundamental and the law of two was just missing a piece of that. I don't think that way anymore, because the law of three is actually a result of the intersection of two aspects of the law of two. Yeah? The neutralizing vector between hot and dry has to be lion, fire, spirit, or whatever aspect you're talking about. That's the neutral vector. Neutral vector for dry and cold, earth, bull, physical body, so on and so forth. All right. Take your notes. Do take your notes, but then please go work with this, because I will get you started on take these ideas, learn to draw things like this, either on a notebook or on a board or whatever the case might be, and be able to get into it fresh each time. Because it'll start just popping out revelations for you. Is it okay? I'm just giving you enough to get you going.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Let's talk about numbers for a minute, if you don't mind. Because numbers in general, well, who was it? Pythagoras, wasn't it? You know what Pythagoras means? Okay, so PYTH has to do with the god Apollo. But before that, like you take PY, which is also the prefix for pyramid, and you get fire. So PY is a fire generally. If you look at ancient languages, PY stands for fire, and TH stands for God, like as in like theos, for example, theology, so on and so forth. So PY also became the epithet for, is that the right word? Well, anyway, became the symbol for Apollo when the Egyptian religion and philosophies entered Greek mythology and philosophy. So the PYTH part of Pythagoras has to do with the god Apollo. Okay, so sun god, right? Fire god, if you will. Agora is the word for like a public gathering or a marketplace. And so I think back in, what was it, like, well, both 2001 and 2003, I visited Greece. And just outside of Athens, they have what they call the ancient agora. There's the modern one too, but it's like a bazaar.
Right.
But the ancient agora it was a really powerful experience just walking through, because for the most part, it's been reduced to rubble. I mean, we're talking about something that was built in 600 BC, really old. Yeah. For the most part, it's rubble. But I don't know if you can see my feet, but you'd get these like bits of wall that are still standing, just about that high, maybe a foot high or whatever the case is. And you can walk around and you can sense what went on there. And you would think, like, agora, okay, marketplace, going back to the original conversation of level 6 of the astrolabe, wheeling and dealing, gaining loss, bartering, all of those types of things. But that is not the radiation there. What the radiation was there is a level 4 aspect. Because the idea of exchange and money and purchasing and all this sort of thing was the neutral vector for the aspect of being able to share something electrically with somebody. And so the idea that Pythagoras was the god Apollo who appeared amidst the ancient agora has this connotation to it, has this idea of you're going into a holy place when you're going into an agora. where you have this electrical exchange with other people. That's the only way I could add it up, because it just didn't feel like they had the modern agora, modern marketplace, you know, and there's buskers and people selling silver. They love to sell silver. People selling tapestries and meats and foods and, you know, all this type of stuff. I mean, it's very, just feels like, you know, I mean, it's yummy. Don't get me wrong. But at the same time, it's hot. It has a hot radiation to it. It's very gain and lossy, you know. I mean, if you don't go in there and barter and haggle and that type of stuff, they know right off the bat you're American. Yeah, they know. Like, Americans don't barter for anything, do they? Right? Or at least not very good at it. Sometimes they'll experiment with it, but just not good. In any event, that was hot and staticky. The ancient agora felt like holy ground. I had to like figure out the reason why. Because for 2,000 or 2,500 years, tourists have been tramping through it, and you would think that it would have lost that signal by then. You know, more of well, level 5 intellectualism at the very least. But no, it wasn't like that. If you ever have the chance to go and feel it for yourself. Don't take my word for it. But going back to Pythagoras, he's often accredited with the idea that numbers are qualitative, not just quantitative. In other words, it's not how many beans you have, but if you have 5 beans, it means something different than if you have 3 beans, or 4, or 2, or 12, or whatever the case might be. Okay, so that's one of the most fundamental things. Now, he didn't get it from there. He got it from Egypt, Pythagoras of Samos, but he's legendarily anyway, traveled to Egypt. And it's pretty obvious that things like a squared plus b squared equals c squared, which I believe is the Pythagorean theorem, they must have known it in Egypt, because they couldn't have built the kinds of things that they built without understanding it. Yeah. So anyway, he grabbed it from there, brought it to Greece, and, you know, fame and fortune and everything else. Tons of women, probably. No, he was supposedly a virgin, but regardless, you see, that's the thing. He brought to the Western world, which pretty much had its origins in Greece, and then Rome took it, and so on and so forth. But he brought this idea of numbers being qualitative instead of just quantitative. The Western world. And this is where we get things like numerology from. And one of the fundamental aspects to it is that odd numbers, he figured, because he did this, what's it called? The tetractys, right? It's where you get, I'll go up for you real quick so that you know. You get 1 dot here, 2, 3, and 4 dots. It's called the tetractys. Okay, and everything you ever wanted to know about numbers and numerology is in this. And 10 digits, for example, or 10 stones. Get some petals, lay them out in this tetractys. And try and learn to say the word tetractys better than I can, because it's not a very natural word to say. But anyway, the idea was that you have male and female numbers, for example. This has to do with we'll get there, okay? We'll actually do a whole thing on numerology and numbers, but I want to give you just a couple of examples today. But yeah, there's male and female numbers. There's positive and negative numbers. I'm not talking about like -10, but female. Also that kind of balance and interplay. The odd ones, you figured out, are masculine inclined, and the even ones are feminine inclined. Now, I'll give you a real quick example of this. In the human genome, you have 46 chromosomes. You say, wait a minute, Pierce, it's 23, but no, it's 23 pairs. All right, so you've got the 2 aspects, the male and female aspect of each of the chromosomes in there. 23 being a positive number. If you take apart the sperm in the zygote, or actually the egg before it's that, they only have 23. They're both masculine. And now we can go back to this aspect, which is here. Right? Both of them. They both have 23 chromosomes. When they merge and form the zygote, then it becomes 46, and that's what makes you. Yeah, but you are it goes from hot and dry, right? Positive and positive. In other words, 23 and 23, and it combines down into this one. Okay, so you've got the, are you with me so far? I'm teaching you how the laws work, yeah? When you get these two positives come together, they actually create two negatives. This is the balance and harmony of the universe. When you get these, and it's the only cells, right? The sperm and the egg are the only cells in the human body that have 23. In the case of the egg, it so that it's protected while it's in the female, because every female is born with every egg they will ever have. They don't manufacture them, right? It will shed 23 of it so that it becomes foreign to the female. Yeah, males manufacture it basically daily, a couple billion or whatever the case is, sperm. But so it doesn't need to be that way. It can already be masculine, because the human complex, being with 46 chromosomes, all of us from that standpoint are female. It's an even number. All right. So do you see how this works? It goes from 23 down to 46. That should tell you something about how the laws work. Did you know a positive and a positive becomes a negative? Because the Taoists did, of course. They just drew it slightly differently. They drew it like a yin-yang symbol. As something begins to go to its maximum, it then becomes its opposite. It's exactly what they were saying, for example. Can't go forever in that regard. All right. And then what happens in the cells? Now this gets into what I said initially, which is in order for God to know himself, he had to forget everything he knew about himself. This has to do with a topic we've talked about before, which is confirmation and aggregation. Confirmation is when a cell that doesn't know itself makes a copy. Okay, and when it makes a copy, it divides. Okay, which is an electrical thing. We'll get into that in a minute too, but it divides. It becomes from one larger thing to two smaller things. That's division. That's confirmation, because then the cell can look at itself and go, ah, that's what I am. That's what I am, right? Has an outside objective influence on it. And really, DNA is amazing from the standpoint that it's basically the only thing on the planet anyway, that can create perfect copies of itself. I find that amazing. I mean, if most of you are old enough to remember Xerox machines, where if you put a page on the Xerox machine, or the copier, I should say, right? Xerox is a branded term. Put it on the copier, spits out a replica, take that replica, put it on the copier, spit out another one, and just keep doing that. Pretty much, you're just going to end up having garbage, because even something like that can't produce exact copies, but DNA is designed to do that. It actually goes down the chain and unzips all of them, and does this number with it and that sort of thing. It's amazing. But that is the idea of confirmation, which is where you get the Vesica Pisces aspect of things, which we'll also go into. It's even scriptural. Isn't it, Mark? I put out the scripture where it talks about the ratios. I'll have to look it up again, but it talks about the ratios of the Vesica Pisces. I think it's in the book of Mark, actually.
I can't think of it. No.
Having to do with the fishes, yes? The number of fishes. Anyway, it's for another day, you see. But
Oh, right, yeah.
it encoded into the Bible, Vesica Pisces ended up becoming one of the early symbols for Christianity. It's just this part kind of flipped over and whatnot, but this has to do with the idea of confirmation.
Yeah.
And what do you have? What's one of the, I call them rites, but what do they call it in the Catholic Church, right? Don't they have a confirmation?
Yes,
Yeah, it's one of the rites of it, isn't it? Yeah, baptism, all these types of things, confirmation. Okay, the other is aggregation. And this is where things begin to expand, they begin to grow. So you've got confirmation, which is this doubling, creates that Vesica Pisces. Then they begin to grow and they become their own things. All right, now you have two cells. If you want to go back to the cells, it happens everywhere. Yeah? So now you have two cells, and then they go through a phase of confirmation and aggregation, and confirmation and aggregation until you've got the entire human complex. All the cells in the body. Yeah? It only happens over 10-ish months, doesn't it? It's amazing to do all that. And by the way, you work that way too. As you're on an Emin journey, you need to be aware of this aspect of confirmation and aggregation. Now we talk about know thyself, which was what it read above the Oracle of Delphi, Pythoness. By the way, there's that word again, the Pythonness. Anyway, know thyself really just means this idea of confirmation and aggregation. As you learn these things, go into a phase of confirmation first. See if it actually is in you or you can get there. And then once you've determined that it is or is not, if it is, then aggregate it. This is where you do your groundwork. Yeah. So confirmation is me telling you things that may or may not be applicable to your lives. Aggregation is when you go and expand on those. Then you can begin to go into this aspect of confirmation, aggregation, until you are a living embodiment of the laws, or until you are a living embodiment of an Emin journey. Confirmation, aggregation. It's actually quite simple. Now, what I'm really saying in essence is that in order to effectively go on an Emin journey, why not follow the laws that are already there in the universe? You can look at yourself and go, all right, confirmation, aggregation on a cellular level. Why not take that and apply it to your Emin journey? And this is where instead of just addition and subtraction, which are the basic numerical aspects of something, like how many beans you have, beans don't multiply. Well, they do actually if you give them an electrical environment, don't you? And you put a bean in the ground, then you've got multiplication or confirmation and affirmation, where it aggregation. I used the wrong word there. That's why it wasn't making sense in my brain. But it aggregates into a plant and then it confirms itself by making new seeds and so on and so forth. But that's an electrical process. That's not a human shifting beans from one side to the other, which would be addition and subtraction. You know, the old symbol, right? At least this is the way I learned it in school, which I think is much more appropriate anyway. All right, see, that's wet. Now I can't draw there. How am I going to do this? Can you see this if I draw a horizontal line and a dot above and a dot below?
Yes.
Yeah, that was the old symbol for division. Now we have computers and they prefer the /. But this has to do with which one? That's the confirmation, right? There's a separation between as above, so below. That's why it had that symbol, because somewhere along the line, they understood that that was one aspect to it. Planet being in the ground and it needs sun, that's the aggregation, the solar cross. You know, they used to draw the sun like this, right? A circle with an X in it. That's called the solar cross. It's also the multiplication sign. That's the aggregation aspect to it. The conformation aspect is the division above and below, two things pulling apart. Does this sound propositional? The way we're going to approach this. I want
Very
nothing
much.
for granted. Okay, don't take anything for granted. If you come across a word, you can literally derail your entire development journey by misunderstanding one word in the beginning. A small departure of an angle creates a massive divergence over time or over space. You know, do you understand, right? If you're looking for that zero angle and you're off by 0.01 this way, well, it might not make a big difference when you're down here, but when you're 20,000 miles away, it's different. The difference is vast. So do remember this, that you can't, if you come across a term or a concept or a word in this aspect of things, please stop me. Okay. Say, Pierce, I don't think I have all of the references or good starting place for these sorts of things. And that will help you make the kind of journey that you're hopefully intending to do. Yeah, good. Okay. Any questions? I will wrap it up, but any questions before I set you loose in the world of laws and numbers and whole bird
I wanted
lines?
to- So
Huh?
we started out with level 5, right?
Huh?
And we were starting out with the Astrolight with level 5, right?
Oh yeah.
Being academic, academia, right? And a while back we were talking in alchemy, being not being the scientist, not being the
Yep.
yeah, but being part of the experiment, being living it.
Yep.
And I think that's a big part of what I think what you were trying to put across to us is not just read about it or have that academic understanding. Yes, I can go and memorize a encyclopedia, a dictionary, and so forth, but it's actually getting inside of that word.
Right. Right. Very good. Yeah.
So that's the message I'm getting.
Yeah, and the useful part of that is just be in it, be present, isn't it?
Right.
And
Right.
the only difference between an alchemist and a chemist is the chemist can walk away and expect
Right.
a lawful result.
Right.
Sodium and chloride, for example, to make table salt. It's always going to work, but there will be a qualitative difference if you're an alchemist making it and you invest yourself in the process. If you give that salt to somebody, well, first of all, you can make holy water with that kind of salt. Yeah.
Right.
Conductive, something conductive in essence holding, essence bearing, I should say. Pardon me. Versus sodium chloride, ACl. Yeah. So very good. Very good. You're right.
It's funny because I occasionally work with mechanical engineers that are very academic, very
sure.
very learned. They can not, so to speak, quote the different rules and laws of physics and so forth, but they're phenomenal on paper.
Yeah.
But taken out into the field with the real life material, there's a massive disconnect.
Yeah, sure.
And so, not to pick on the engineers, but I see myself in that state sometimes where I've got it academically in my head. And say I'm researching. I love to research. Every meeting I walk away with countless hours of questions and
Thousand new things to go into. Yeah, sure.
So yeah, but I find myself being academic sometimes where it's and I have to laugh at myself at that point, go, okay, you're an academic,
Yeah.
you basically bypassed, you saw the flowers out there in the field and you can call them by the rose and by the dragon's, blah, 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 but you never took the time to smell them, to understand the nature of them.
You'll never understand a butterfly by ripping it apart and analyzing its constituent components. Right?
Exactly.
Or a
Exactly.
flower for that matter, or anything else. Yeah.
Exactly.
Good.
So that's the message I got from what you were trying to convey near the end of the meeting when everybody was attendant.
Yeah. It's a more balanced way to approach it. If you want a
Right.
template for how to do it, always approach everything with your body, your mind, and your emotions. Okay, train yourself to have conversations with your body, your mind, your emotions. Train yourself to look at new topics and explore, do your groundwork with your body, your mind, and emotions. And the reason why is because they don't speak the same language.
Right.
The body might speak German and the mind might speak Chinese, because it's a very it's a very mental language actually. You know, and the emotions might speak Italian. Yeah. And they can't communicate with one another, but your soul can. They transmit that information into your soul, and your soul can make sense of it. But if your soul is only getting just the information from your mind, it's starving. It's like, well, where's the body and emotions? I can't do anything with this. There's not these three vectors to come together. So yeah, if you want a more practical way to approach any kind of work, be it secular or human work, use those three aspects, bring them in.
Right. Right.
Okay. NZ, you good?
Yeah. I think I have some work to do. I think it's very interesting what you said about our revelations, that when we do this work, we might get revelations while we're doing it. Yeah.
This didn't come from an archive, by the way. I mean, the archives are quite useful, but I get up around 4 a.m. generally speaking, and I'll sit down and I'll just, try and do that. Do these kind of workout things. So this perspective arrived this morning. It's not something I've been working on, but that's an example of it, isn't it? Where you can just go, okay, I'm going to freshly approach the law of 4 right now. And draw it out, whatever you need to do. Get your body, mind, and emotions involved, and you'd be surprised what drops in. It's really the right term for it. Just you make a connection, it drops in. So good. Yeah, go off and okay.
Oh, okay.
You're on the wrong side of the car there.
No, we're on the correct side of the car. You colonials to drive on. Sorry, former colonials drive on the. Oh, hang on, that's me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I tried to drive in the UK. It took a bit getting used to for me.
Yeah.
Always trying to want to pull into the wrong oncoming traffic and whatnot. All right, are we good? Yeah, the video will be available. I'll let you know where it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
It was really good to see everybody again.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's really good to see everybody again.
Yeah.
Are we happy? Are we happy with this way of working for a while?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I will avoid the temptation to fiddle with it, so long as it's leading each of you somewhere.
Sure.
I'm just gonna, the new things that come in, I'll write about them. I'll do whatever I need to do with them. But for you folks, please just know that I will help with a more solid foundation.
Sure.
Instead of branching off into the great unknown. I mean, some of the stuff coming in, I presume it's not even going to be relevant for a couple hundred years. I'm not kidding. Not kidding. I'm talking about like what you might be able to do as a Model 3 human, for example.
Yeah. Timings has always been a strange thing with the Eminent.
Hasn't it though? Because we try to stay on the edge of creation, don't we? I mean, that's an Eamon aspect. That's an aspect of an Eamon journey, is getting right up to the ledge, yeah, of what's coming in at the time.
Yeah.
All right. Great.
Just something before
You can't
go.
help it, huh? That's great.
Yeah.
Keep it going.
That's fine.
Keep it going.
When you're talking about early Christian symbology
Hmm.
of the fish, it was Also integrated into a more ornate design
Hmm.
to integrate the fish with the menorah.
Ah, right.
Yeah, in fact, oh, where is it? I don't know if you guys can see it there.
Oh yeah, sure. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So you got the fish at the bottom that forms part of the six-pointed star, and
And the
then
cross
you've got
above it, yes?
and then the menorah.
Ah,
over
okay.
it.
All right.
There is no cross on it. Yeah.
No, I see now. Yeah. It looked like a
Yeah.
cross at first, but I got you now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we'll talk about symbols and all that too. I'll find that scripture where it actually talks about the mathematical properties of the Vesca Pisces encoded in the language of having to do with the number of fish, and there were several things. It's
Yeah.
in my notes, but yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to acknowledge, and I'm pretty sure it's in the book of Mark, but you've got to acknowledge that they were already talking about it. It just, both Judaism and Christianity are highly encoded. It's like you kind of need a key to really unlock them.
Yes. That's what it's all about, is keys to unlock things.
Except the thing is color, numbers, symbol, sigil, those sorts of things are the keys. And you can literally take those aspects and go unlock anything as long as it has a natural arising. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you get stuck on something, for example, if some organization is representing a particular color and a particular symbol that comes down to a certain numerological aspect, and yet you get into it and it begins to not make any sense from the standpoint of natural law, then it didn't have a natural arising. It's called wrong manufacture. Hmm?
Yeah.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
happens too, doesn't it? I mean, wrong manufacture happens according to law, but it's not going to lead you to God. It's not going to lead you up the way of creation.
Yeah.
I can think of a few organizations that I won't name because I don't want the attendance here, but you probably can too. Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything showing up for you all, attendance wise?
I'm finding it around the throat.
Oh, okay.
I'm noticing that my voice sounds different.
Yeah. More of a ring to it, I would say.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Good.
It's,
To be
yeah,
observant.
when we were doing the ball things.
Yeah.
And I passed it to Hannah. She said, "Oh, that's really heavy." So I
Yeah.
don't know if to take that as a compliment of the quality not being good, or the volume being large.
Yeah.
I'll find out a bit later on.
You know the Toyer exercise with moving the yellow ball around? Have you been exposed to that one?
No, I
Oh,
don't know that
okay.
one.
All right, we'll have to do that. But inside, you manufacture emotional force, which can have a very healing and cleaning quality to it, and you move it around to your extremities, your head, all the way down to your feet, back up, and then you retain it back in the place where the Eminent is, where your astral content lives, and
Yeah.
retain it there.
You see, these are the things that will be good to do, because there was so much talk and not a lot of actual do.
Yeah.
And part of that wasn't anybody's fault. It was just the sheer flow of everything that was coming through.
I agree.
Particularly
Okay.
with people that joined, like myself in '88. There was the catch up of from 72 to 88, and then there's that flow that was coming in at that time.
Mm.
So yeah, it was a constant juggling act of trying to keep up with the current work while trying to get the foundations.
Well,
And of
you
course,
know,
foundations, it doesn't mean the basics. It means that which everything is built upon.
can I tell you something in that regard?
Yeah, please.
I don't think, at least what I've added up, I don't think Leo's goal was to have guide people on a development journey. That was for later. The
Right.
first thing Leo had to do was just to put out everything that was coming in, you know, and we wouldn't even have some of the archives that we have today um, if it wasn't for Ruth, right? Because Leo would be on the loo writing something and crumple it up and throw it in the bin, and she would go in and rescue it. You know that? We wouldn't have some of the archives we had today if it wasn't for that constant outflow and that constant process.
Yeah.
Good for her.
Very much. It interesting the way that you put that as well, that it was what was coming through and coming out. And Leo often said that, or he described that being on the loo is a great place to meditate on things.
Sure. Yeah, especially the older you get, you know. It takes longer. How long are your meditations now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's true though,
Yeah,
right?
it was good that those things were recovered.
Yeah,
Those
for sure.
pieces of paper.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, you know, you can take it from the standpoint of one of the natural laws when it comes to the dynamics of conscious creation is that everything eats and everything excretes, except what is generally not understood is that everything eats something else's excrement and excretes something that another level of life eats. So if you're in a process and you're getting an Enzi, this applies to your comment, if you're getting connected and having things drop in and all that, what you're really exposed to is the idea of an angel or something like that. How do you say it? Excreting, right? I mean, really.
Yeah.
Nothing gross about it. It's just how it works. I think it's quite brilliant, actually.
Yeah.
It's the way it works. Huh? I mean, it does. When you're attended, this is actually one of the reasons why there have been so many points in time when there's a part of me that wishes I could just step away from this work. Not the work, because I'll always do the work, but step away from this role. Then I can't. I start getting too stacked up, and then it stops giving it to me. So I'm not processing it out. So it's just the natural order of things, I suppose. Anyway, I'm under a lifelong contract. So I can't really do that anyway.
That's
Are you?
good to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. The idea of a contract is that there's consequences if you don't fulfill it.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Not everyone's under a contract, from a creational contract, other than to the most fundamental one is to be generative in whatever case that might be. It even shows up in the first commandment, or the first command given to humanity in the scriptures, which was to become fruitful and multiply. It wasn't talking about make humans. I mean, obviously that's part of it, but it wasn't talking about make humans. It really means be generative.
Yeah.
Yeah. Take in those things around you and make produce. Same thing with cultivate the land, although that slightly different. This thing is ingenious. You know what I got as a gift? It has, and I'm not going to turn it upside down, but on the bottom here, it's got coils. All right, these little two gold coils, and in the tray there, you can see it's actually plugged in. It makes contact with those and it keeps it warm the whole time. So when I get onto babbling for an hour and a half, it stays warm. It's wonderful. What a good invention. Mark. Mark, you'll love it much better than, stick it in the microwave, huh?
Microwaves, evil things. Yeah.
Evil, yeah.
Evil. Yeah. In one way, the invention, sorry, the marketing of them is because it breaks down certain nutrients, which means that people have to eat more, increases the carbohydrate, which again affects people's metabolism. And of course, the drug companies own shares in food companies, and food companies own shares in drug companies.
Symbiotic relationship, huh?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And yet, I will use one from time to time when I'm in a process and I don't want to wait 45 minutes for something because it would derail it. Yeah. So the point isn't that, well, my larger point in that is that that is an example of it comes down to the reason why you do something.
Yeah, exactly.
Not as an excuse for bad behavior.
No.
That's how it's often interpreted. Yeah. It's not what you do, it's the reason why you do something, I kicked my dog because it was a holy moment, like, come on. People use it for excuse for bad behavior sometimes.
But the second part of that saying is to do with as long as it's clean.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
And that's the bit that's very, very rarely taught.
Yeah, right.
Very rarely taught.
Kind of like you say it as a cough, as long as it's clean.
Yeah.
Humans are funny, aren't we? We are funny. I was trying to get away with mischief, aren't we?
Yeah.
Just, if you got to do it, get away with the mischief of God and creation.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with mischief so long as it stays out of bringing in derision.
I'll give you a new definition of mischievous or mischief if you want. Are you open?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Am I keeping anybody? If I am, okay.
No.
You can keep me here all day, It's how it works. As long as there's this push-pull stimulus response back and forth, as long as there's a two-way traffic, I'll go on forever. Until I drop. I did it again, didn't I? Let me think here. No paper towel. All right. I'm going to talk it through a bit because this will take 20 minutes to dry. Okay. So you have your cultural line of life. It's just a horizontal line. It's what you were born into. You might have been born here, maybe you die here. And everyone has a planetary role because it's the planet of repetition. You're born into a specific role, and so you take someone like Michael Jackson or Beethoven or Nikola Tesla or Einstein or whatever. They had to do what they did because it was their role. And when Beethoven died, for example, someone else dropped into that role and did a Beethoven. And when Tesla died, someone else dropped into that role and did a Tesla, you see. And when the janitor at your local school dies, someone drops into that role. That's the way that it works. Most people don't have much of a choice. Mischief, in a cosmic sense, is when you're going along a line and you encounter a way, all right, and it bumps you out of that role of life. And it brings you up to a different place where the opportunity exists to have a different life than what the general repetitive role of the law of accident of the planet intended for you. You then get under the law of fate. Fate having to do with the planets. That was the original meaning of it, Fatum. In that. That is mischief of the right kind for the human. This is compliance, the line of life. Mischief can happen there. So yes, absolutely get into mischief. Now, the thing about it is the farther away you get from that, right, because it can work like this, the stronger the pull and attraction is to go back down. The higher you rise, the farther you fall, I think is the way that they say that. You know?
Yes.
And so you have to make sure that you have support mechanisms in place to be able to maintain that level of connection, to get into better and better mischief from the standpoint of the 7 levels of the ray of creation. Can you be mischievous in a solar way, for example?
That's opening up something or a whole range of things.
Of course, yeah.
isn't it?
I mean, King Arthur was obviously mischievous in a solar way. Right? Actually, no, that's not true. It was planetary. When he drew the sword from the stone, or the words from the notes, anagram for you. When he drew the sword from the stone, he suspended the 48 laws of the planet in favor of the 24 laws of the planets in the solar system as a whole. Invoked the plastic mediator so he could release that magnetic pull on it. Only one with the kind of development above planetary level would have been able to draw the sword from the stone. Excalibur. Behold, Excalibur. That's a good kind of mischief.
Yeah.
And then the Lady of the Lake, of course, is this aspect here, bringing it back down. If you're familiar with the reference. If not, you should really read more of Arthurian legends and writings and whatnot. The Pendragon School is a thing. It is a thing in the Astrolight. It's where the inspiration for it came from. Granted, a lot of it's malarkey as far as the Arthurian legends and all this type of stuff, but it does have its origins in the Pendragon School of the Astrolight, which if you haven't encountered, you probably will at some point in time. Have you? Are they all standing around your bed looking like monks? They're sleeping? No. Well, it probably will. Anything else? Any other directions? Good job, by the way. Usually I close it out because everyone shuts down. Faculty kind of go just stacked up to the eyeballs in it. And I'll tell you something else regarding the role of life. I'll leave you with this point. There doesn't have to be a Leo on the planet at all times. It's a choice you can make, but the planet doesn't require a Leo or a Raymond Armin for that matter. Unless it needs another ambulance driver or egg salesman or encyclopedia salesman, right? That could have been the path. Doesn't need a Leo. You can opt into that by the right kind of cosmic mischief, if you will. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yes.
See you next Sunday. Okay?
Yes. Yes.
Good.
Yes.